She hired him to walk her overly pampered poodle and keep an eye on her stalker, but he had a few secrets of his own. What started as a job turned into a whirlwind of unexpected protection, deep emotional scars, and the most reckless kind of love. If you love unexpected romance, sassy dogs, and undercover heroes, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. The afternoon sun filtered through gauzy curtains, throwing lace-like shadows across the marble floor of Chloe Armstrong's open-plan living room. The glass walls of her Hollywood Hills home looked out over a city too loud, too bright, too eager. But up here, cocooned in fragrant silence, it almost felt like peace. Chloe stirred a honey-laced chamomile tea with one hand and absently scratched Sir Barksalot behind his velvety ears with the other. The poodle, freshly trimmed and still faintly smelling of lavender shampoo, emitted a gentle huff of satisfaction. Her assistant's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "You need protection. You know that, right?" Chloe rolled her eyes, even though no one could see her. "I need someone to walk this diva twice a day and pick up after him when he decides Sunset Boulevard is his personal throne room." Riley sighed. "I'm serious. 3 fan incidents in 1 week. One guy tried to climb the damn gate. I'm handling it." "You're avoiding it." Chloe didn't respond. She just stared out the window at the faraway glitter of downtown. L.A. was a city of masks. Hers just happened to have a ring light and 2 million followers. Fame had come quickly, with a viral kitchen hack that spiraled into a lifestyle empire. Suddenly, everyone wanted her face, her tone, her home, her dog. And now, apparently, her safety was up for negotiation. "I posted the job," she said softly, more to the wind than to Riley. "Dog walker, mornings and evenings, reliable, discreet." "That's not good enough. I don't want a security detail. I don't want to look like I'm afraid." "But you are." Chloe ended the call with a gentle tap and turned her attention to the dog now sprawled at her feet like a fallen pillow. "You and me, Barky. We just need someone who doesn't mind poop bags and the occasional paparazzi ambush." The knock came at exactly 7 o'clock the next morning. Sir Barksalot was already prancing in circles, anticipating his royal promenade. Chloe, still in silk shorts and a hoodie that hung off one shoulder, opened the door with mild curiosity and no makeup because the job didn't exactly call for glamour. She hadn't expected the man on the porch. He stood at ease, hands clasped behind his back, like he was waiting for orders. Tall, broad, not bulky but lean, like a swimmer turned soldier. His shirt was plain gray, his jeans unremarkable, but something about him felt precise. Trimmed beard, dark eyes, a face that gave nothing away, and a presence that made her heart flutter uncomfortably, like it didn't know whether to flirt or flee. "Jax Morgan," he said simply. "Here for the dog." Her brows lifted. "You answered the ad?" "Yes." She waited. No joke, no self-effacing smile, no awkward chuckle about walking a poodle named Sir Barksalot. Just that still, unreadable face. "I didn't picture—" She hesitated. "You." He glanced down at the dog, who had stopped prancing and was now tilting his head at Jax with an expression that could only be described as cautious respect. "I have experience with animals," he said, "and I'm punctual." She could have asked for references. She could have probed about his background, questioned why a man who looked like he belonged in a tactical training video wanted to pick up dog poop for a living. But Sir Barksalot, notoriously fussy, stepped forward and sniffed Jax's boot, then looked up with his signature grunt of approval. Chloe exhaled. "Fine. 1-week trial. 2 walks a day. No photos. No press. Don't talk about me. Don't touch anything inside, and if you lose him, I'll destroy you on every platform known to man." Something flickered behind his eyes. Amusement? Challenge? He nodded. Understood. She handed over the leash. Their fingers brushed, just for a second. His skin was warm, the calluses rough against her palm. He took the leash gently, crouched beside the dog, and murmured something she couldn't quite hear. Sir Barksalot wagged once, and trotted down the front path like he had just enlisted. Chloe watched them disappear down the hill, an odd tightness curling in her chest. She didn't know what to make of him. By the third walk, she noticed things. Jax never checked his phone. He never wore earbuds. He didn't meander like the college kid she'd hired last year, who spent more time on TikTok than watching the dog. Instead, he scanned the horizon, as if he expected trouble to come slicing out of the palm trees. His eyes flicked toward shadows, parked cars, pedestrians, moving too slowly. On the fifth day, she followed them. It wasn't paranoia, exactly. More like curiosity. She waited until they were halfway down the street, then slipped on sunglasses and a baseball cap, and jogged a few blocks behind them, pretending to scroll her phone. Jax walked like someone trained. Every few steps, he'd glance over his shoulder. Not back at Hare he didn't see her butt up toward second-story balconies. He paused at intersections and subtly shifted Sir Barksalot to his left side, always putting himself between the dog and the street. Once, when a garbage truck made a sudden hiss of compressed air, he moved faster than seemed humanly possible, shielding the dog with his body until the threat passed. It was odd, strangely moving. Chloe ducked into a boutique cafe and watched him walk past through the glass. That night, she didn't sleep well. Not because she was afraid, but because something was stirring in the quiet places. The ones she'd walled off with work and performance and the careful choreography of being seen without being vulnerable. She replayed their brief conversations, his silence, the way he never asked about her job, her fame, her past. Most people tried to drop her handle into conversation within 5 minutes to prove they knew who she was. Jax didn't seem to care. The next morning, she met him at the door with a travel mug of black coffee. "I figured you for a no-cream kind of guy." He accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." Sir Barksalot gave a royal bark and pushed past her, tail swishing. Jax glanced down at the dog, then back at her. "Anything I should know today?" It was a strange question. She almost laughed, but then she thought of the gate alarm last night, the blurry security footage, a figure in a hoodie standing too close for too long. She hesitated. "No," she said, even though it was a lie. "Just another walk." He gave a single nod, clipped the leash, and walked into the sunlight. She watched them go again, and this time she let the door stay open just a little longer than usual. The morning air smelled of wet asphalt and eucalyptus, rich and bracing, freshly rinsed by an overnight drizzle that had darkened the pavement and made the bougainvillea nod heavily with beads of water. Chloe's robe clung to the inside of her thighs as she leaned on the iron railing of her balcony, cradling her third cup of coffee. Below, on the winding drive that sloped down toward the main gate, Jax was fastening Sir Barksalot's collar with practiced hands. The dog yawned with a squeaky puff and trotted beside him with the blind trust of a soldier's loyal companion. Chloe wasn't sure why she kept watching him. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. There was something precise about the way Jax moved, a kind of stillness in motion that caught her off guard. Most people fidgeted or rambled or cracked jokes to fill space. He didn't. He occupied the world like he had measured every inch of it in advance. She took a sip and winced. The coffee had gone cold. Down below, Jax paused. Without looking up, his eyes scanned the rooftops across the way, his body subtly angling so Sir Barksalot remained nestled close to the inside of the drive. Chloe leaned forward, her fingers tightening on the mug. He hadn't heard anything, no car, no voices, and yet he moved as if he had. Later that afternoon, as she scrolled half-heartedly through email on her sun-drenched couch, the house alarm chirped a notification from the gate camera. Someone had approached the intercom. She flicked to the feed and squinted. No one was there, just the faint shimmer of heat rising from the stone drive. Her breath caught. She rewound the footage, tapping frame by frame, until she caught it. A shadow in a hood, maybe male, maybe not, thin build. standing still just beyond the camera's center, before quickly ducking out of view. No buzz, no attempt to speak into the intercom, just presence, observing. She sat very still, one hand pressed to her chest, and listened. The house was quiet, too quiet. Sir Barksalot was asleep, curled in his velvet bed like royalty. Chloe muted the footage and stood, barefoot on the cool tile, moving toward the front door without knowing why. She opened it and blinked into the golden light. Jax was already walking up the hill. He wore a black t-shirt this time, clinging to a body carved by discipline. His face, shaded by a simple baseball cap, was unreadable. He carried the leash in one hand, loose but attentive, and the dog at his side was unusually calm. She stepped aside as he approached. "You're back early." He gave her a slow nod. Route felt wrong. Wrong how? Too many cars parked too close. Same van on 3 corners. One man followed us for half a block, pretending to tie his shoe. Her throat tightened. "And?" I adjusted. She swallowed. "Adjusted? Took a new route. Cut through the canyon trail. Lost the man. He wasn't a jogger." Chloe stared at him. Her stomach twisted with a familiar unease, the kind that told her she should have listened to her instincts weeks ago. That maybe Riley had been right. She knelt to gather Sir Barksalot into her arms, burying her face in his freshly brushed curls. The dog huffed and licked her cheek. Jax waited, silent, still. She rose slowly. "Do you carry a weapon?" His eyes didn't flinch. "Yes." "Here?" "Not on your property, but on the walks?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Only when it's warranted." "And today it was?" His silence was confirmation enough. Chloe wrapped her arms around herself and looked past him, down the sloping drive to the city that shimmered like a mirage. "You don't seem like a dog walker." "I didn't say I was." That made her blink. "Then what are you?" He tilted his head, as if weighing what she could handle. "Retired military. Currently freelance. Private detail work. I used to specialize in high-risk surveillance extraction." She blinked again. "So, Bodyguard. Among other things." "Then why answer my ad?" He looked at the poodle. "You posted about the dog needing help. You didn't say you needed protecting." She laughed, but the sound caught in her throat. "And if I had?" He didn't answer. His eyes held hers a moment longer, then flicked down to Sir Barksalot, who had stretched across the threshold and was now licking his paw like nothing in the world mattered beyond the taste of himself. Chloe exhaled and stepped back. "Come in." Jax hesitated, then stepped into the foyer. His eyes moved not nosily, but with quiet awareness. He took in the art on the walls, the subtle disarray of a life lived half online, half in curated silence. His gaze lingered on a ceramic bowl filled with chewed pencils, an unopened bottle of wine on the counter, the faint shimmer of a blown-out candle. She poured him a glass of water without asking, and he took it with a soft thank you. They stood near the kitchen island, both sipping, both quiet. "I'm not who people think I am," she said finally. He nodded once. "I figured." She tilted her head. "You did?" "You're observant," he said. "But you're lonely, and your eyes check the windows before they check the mirror." That stunned her. He didn't press the moment. He just drank, then set the glass down with a gentle clink. "You said you didn't want a security detail, that you could handle yourself." "I did." "Do you still believe that?" She didn't answer. He stepped closer, not touching her, not crowding, just enough that she could feel the heat of his body. "You're being watched," he said quietly. "Not by fans, not by curious tourists, by someone deliberate, someone patient." A chill ran along the curve of her spine. She looked up and, for the first time, truly studied his face. There were tiny white lines near his eyes, the kind formed by sun and strain, not laughter. A faint scar at his jaw, half hidden by stubble, the weight of someone who had lived too much life in silence. She reached for words and found none. Sir Barksalot barked once, sharply, then trotted toward the door, tail high. The spell broke. Jax moved first, retrieving the leash. "I'll be back for the evening walk." Chloe nodded. "Okay." He opened the door, the sunlight flaring behind him like something out of a movie she wasn't brave enough to write yet. He paused on the threshold and glanced back, just once. "Keep the gate locked. Don't answer unless you know who it is." Then he was gone. And Chloe, standing in her own home, realized her hands were trembling. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and steamed milk, the air thick with warmth and something quieter, something that trembled just beneath the clink of porcelain and the hum of the espresso machine. Chloe sat at the counter, barefoot, her hair still damp from the shower, and her oversized cardigan slipping off one shoulder. She kept her fingers curled around the ceramic mug as if it could anchor her to this small, fragile sense of normal. Outside, the sky was streaked with late morning light, the kind that glowed too golden to be trusted. The world felt too still. It had been 3 days since the note on the gate. Not a text. Not an email. A note, folded twice, handwritten, tucked under the latch like a secret. She hadn't told anyone, not even Riley. She didn't want the panic, the interviews, the police with their tired questions and empty reassurances. She had told Jax, though. Not with words, not directly, but he knew. She'd watched the way he scanned her property differently afterward, the way his posture shifted slightly, like something inside him had re-engaged. She hadn't asked if he had read the note. Maybe he had. Maybe he didn't need to. This morning, she didn't wait for him to knock. She was at the door before his footsteps hit the porch, and when she opened it, he stood there as if he had known she would. His clothes were the same palette as always, gray and black and unbranded. His hair was damp, too, curling faintly at the temples, and she wondered if he had showered just to come here. The thought felt dangerous, soft around the edges. She held out a second cup of coffee. No sugar, no milk, just like he preferred. "I made enough for 2, she said, though her voice cracked on the word 2. Jax accepted the cup with a nod, his fingers brushing hers, warm and steady. "Thank you." He didn't step inside right away, and she didn't invite him. Instead, they stood just outside the threshold, the morning air slipping between them, scented with rosemary and concrete dust. Sir Barksalot padded over and gave a snort of approval before flopping dramatically onto the welcome mat. "You don't ask questions," Chloe said, after a long sip, her eyes on the horizon, not him. "Why is that?" Jax took a drink, swallowed, then said in that low, careful voice, "Most people ask to be seen but don't want to be known. I try not to confuse the two." Her lips parted, and the breath she took in tasted like truth. She turned to look at him, really look at him, and found herself caught in the quiet pull of his gaze. His eyes didn't demand. They didn't even search. They waited, patiently, like they'd been taught to hold space until someone else was ready. "Were you always like this?" she asked. "Before, whatever you did, the military, the bodyguard stuff." He exhaled through his nose, a sound that might have been a laugh in another life. "No. I used to talk too much, ask too many questions, thought everything had an answer. And now?" He met her gaze. "Now I know the silence is usually the answer." Something inside her ached at that, deep and unexpected, like a bruise she hadn't noticed until pressed. She stepped back and held the door open. "Come in." Jax hesitated, not out of reluctance, but respect. He stepped inside with the kind of quiet reverence that made her feel like he understood how to enter another person's space without taking anything from it. She led him to the kitchen, and they sat across from each other at the marble island, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only sound between them for a while. She tapped her nail against the mug. "Why are you really here?" He didn't blink. Because someone out there thinks you're vulnerable, and I don't think you are. I think you're tired of pretending you're not." The words lodged in her throat. She wasn't ready to agree, but she couldn't argue either. Instead, she asked, "So you took a fake job walking my dog to keep me safe?" He sipped his coffee. "You wouldn't have let a bodyguard pass the door, but you trusted the dog." Sir Barksalot, as if on cue, rolled over and exposed his fluffy belly, snoring with abandon. She smiled in spite of herself. "He's got a better gut instinct than most people." Jax's eyes softened. Not quite a smile, but close. "That's what I figured." They sat like that for a while, the kind of silence that didn't press or stretch, but simply coexisted. Chloe found herself watching the way his fingers wrapped around the mug, the light scrape of his thumb along the ceramic, the faint pull of a scar on his wrist that disappeared beneath his sleeve. She wanted to ask what had happened there. She wanted to ask about all of it, but instead, she asked something else. "What did you lose?" He looked up slowly, and something inside him shuddered. Not harshly, gently, like the closing of a door that had been opened too long. "A friend," he said finally. "In Afghanistan. He didn't make it out." She nodded, not because she understood, but because she knew enough not to speak. "I told myself I'd walk away after that. Do something quiet, something simple. Dog walking," she whispered. "It seemed peaceful. And then your ad showed up." Her throat tightened. She hadn't expected the heat behind her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her mug again. "I didn't think anyone real would answer," she said. "I didn't think anyone real had written it." He said it without irony, without pretense. Just the soft truth of it, laid between them like an offering. She reached for something to say and found only breath. "I don't know who I am without the screen," she confessed. Jax tilted his head. "That's not true. I've seen you off camera." She raised an eyebrow. "Doing what? Feeding barky tuna from a crystal bowl?" "No," he said. "I saw you crying on the stairs 2 nights ago, when you thought no one was watching." The air between them shifted, not with shame, but with something deeper, a vulnerability that didn't threaten to undo, but to connect. She looked down at her hands. "I'm tired of being scared." He stood, slowly, and stepped around the island until he was close enough to touch. He didn't, not yet, but she could feel his presence like gravity. "You're not alone," he said. Chloe looked up. And in that moment, she believed him. It started with the sound of glass shifting in the frame. A whisper of movement, almost too soft to register, just the sigh of the wind against the pannier, maybe not. Chloe sat upright in bed, her ears tuning sharply to the silence that followed. The house was dark. The moonlight pooled silver on the floor, slicing between the edges of the curtain and pooling across the hardwood like spilled water. Sir Barkslot stirred at the foot of the bed. Not a bark, not a whine. Just a low, tremoring growl, soft and deep, the kind that vibrated through the mattress like a warning pulled straight from his belly. Chloe slid from beneath the covers, her heartbeat thudding in her throat. She didn't turn on the light. Something primal told her not to. She moved barefoot across the cool floor, her nightshirt swaying around her knees. Her phone sat on the nightstand, but her fingers didn't reach for it. Instead, she edged toward the hall, her pulse skipping now, jagged and irregular. She knew this feeling. She'd felt it as a child once, when she had come home and sensed the argument that had already happened between her parents before a word had been spoken. A silence that wasn't peace, but aftermath. Tonight felt like that. She stepped lightly through the hallway, the shadows deepening around her. At the top of the stairs, she paused. Down below, the house slumbered in stillness, but it was too still, too obedient, as though it had been told to wait. A shape moved across the lower level, just the briefest flicker of motion in the reflection of the glass sliding door. She couldn't breathe. Her voice lodged behind her ribs, and she didn't scream. Couldn't, Her feet didn't carry her forward either. She was frozen, suspended in the hush of something terrible about to happen. Then, another shadow broke off from the wall, larger, faster. It collided with the first, not with sound, but with intention. A body surged forward, grabbed the intruder from behind, slammed him into the wall with a dull, soft thud that made the framed photograph of Sir Barksalot rattle in its mount. The man didn't have a chance to scream. A thick forearm locked around his throat, and in seconds the movement stilled. Chloe's knees buckled. She gripped the railing for support, staring down at the scene unfolding below like something pulled from a dream. Jax. He was shirtless, his chest rising in measured breaths. His skin gleamed in the pale light, damp with sweat and the effort of restraint. The man beneath him was motionless now, slumped against the floor like a broken question. Jax pressed 2 fingers to the intruder's neck, checking something, then looked up. Their eyes locked. Jax didn't speak. He only nodded once, then turned his attention back to the intruder, carefully binding his wrists with a zip tie that had appeared from nowhere. He moved with precision, not panic. Not even adrenaline, just cold focus and deliberate motion. Chloe stood at the top of the stairs, her entire body trembling, barely able to breathe. Sir Barksalot pressed against her legs, silent but alert, his eyes fixed on Jax. The police came quietly, summoned by a call she hadn't seen Jax make. When they arrived, Jax stepped back into the shadows of the room, letting them take the lead, answering their questions with curt, factual clarity. He didn't elaborate. He didn't show off. He simply explained what he had seen, what he had done, and what the man had carried in his kawada knife, concealed in duct tape, wrapped in a plastic bag. Chloe heard all of this from the armchair in the corner, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea she didn't remember making. Her house looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The illusion of safety had been pierced clean through. After the police left, after the man was gone and her name was added to another report and the security footage was filed away, she finally looked at Jax. He stood at the far end of the room, one shoulder against the wall, silent. "You didn't wake me," she whispered. "I didn't want to scare you. I was already scared." He didn't argue. He just looked at her, and in that look, she saw something more than protection, something quiet and fierce and unrelenting. He had been waiting for this, expecting it, preparing. "You sleep in the guest house," she said. "But you were already inside." He nodded once. "I heard the latch on the gate. I came in through the back, before he reached the door." "And if you hadn't?" Jax looked down, then walked to the couch and sat beside her. His body was solid, warm, still humming with tension, but his voice was low. "Then he would have hurt you." The words hung between them like smoke. Chloe reached for his hand before she could stop herself. His fingers were rough, his grip strong, but the way he held her hand was gentle. Her palm fit into his like it had always belonged there. She stared down at their hands, at the quiet connection, and something inside her broke loose. "I don't know how to be alone in this house anymore," she said. "Not after tonight." "You won't be." "You say that, but people leave. Everyone does." "I won't." She looked up at him. His jaw was tight, his brow furrowed with something close to pain. "I see it, you know," she whispered. "See what?" "You pretend you're made of steel, but you're not." He didn't move. "You're carrying something heavy, something old. You think it makes you dangerous, but it doesn't. It just makes you human." His thumb brushed against her wrist, feather-light. "I couldn't save him," Jax said quietly. "My friend." I hesitated. "Just for a second. That's all it took." She moved closer, her shoulder touching his. "You saved me," she said. "Doesn't that count for something?" He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away. The room smelled of cold tea and the faint smoke of extinguished fear. Outside, the sky was beginning to pale, the earliest threads of dawn knitting into the horizon. Sir Barksalot, curled up at their feet with a sigh. Chloe leaned her head on Jax's shoulder, and for the first time in days, she let her eyes close. Sleep found her there, not because she wasn't afraid anymore, but because someone had stayed. Rain fell with the slow, thoughtful rhythm of something deliberate. It tapped against the windows in long, delicate fingers, tracing each pane like a lullaby. Outside, the city was hushed beneath the weather's gentle insistence, wrapped in gray light and the perfume of wet earth and distant jasmine. Inside Chloe's home, the world had folded itself into a quiet pocket, warm and dim and breathing. The fireplace crackled softly, flames licking up the logs with lazy confidence. The scent of burning cedar mixed with the faint vanilla of the candle she'd forgotten to blow out. Shadows danced across the white walls, long and golden, moving like slow hands over the art, the bookshelves, the gleaming frame of the sliding door. It was the kind of night meant for softness, but tension curled itself in Chloe's spine, familiar and unwelcome. She stood at the kitchen island, stirring soup without hunger. The ladle scraped against the pot in a slow, even arc. She was barefoot, hair in a messy braid that fell over one shoulder, wearing a hoodie 3 sizes too big. She felt like a child inside it, not smaller exactly, but not fully herself either. Her thoughts kept drifting, unmoored and restless, to the man in the guest house. He had said little after that night. No need to. They had fallen into a strange rhythm. He would walk the perimeter twice before noon. He had updated the locks, without asking. He cooked exactly once, a pan of eggs and spinach on her stove that he had left clean and dry as if it had never been used. And each night she could hear his footsteps in the gravel between the houses, slow and even, reassuring in a way that made her chest ache. She poured the soup into 2 bowls before she could stop herself. The door to the guest house was cold beneath her knuckles. She knocked once. The rain behind her whispered in encouragement, and her breath hung lightly in the air, scented faintly of rosemary and the cedar smoke she had brought with her on her sweater. Jax answered a moment later, sleeves pushed up to his elbows, eyes shadowed in the warm light spilling from inside. He looked at her, then at the bowls, and something softened across his expression. "I thought you might be hungry," she said. He stepped aside without a word. The guest house was small but meticulous, sparsely furnished with the same deliberate care that shaped every movement he made. One low lamp glowed in the corner beside a worn chair. A neatly folded wool blanket lay across the back of the couch. His boots were aligned by the door. His jacket hung just so. Chloe felt like she had stepped inside a part of his mind. They ate in silence at the small table by the window. Rain painted trails on the glass beside them, and the soft clink of spoons was the only sound for a long time. "You don't decorate," she said finally, after setting her spoon down. "You arrange." Jax looked up from his bowl. "I don't stay places long enough to decorate." "Is this temporary?" she asked, not meaning the room. Not really. His pause was thoughtful. "Was supposed to be. But some things change." She exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her gaze moved across the room again and landed on a black case tucked beside the armchair. It looked official. It didn't belong in a guest house. Her curiosity flared like a struck match. "What's in that?" He followed her gaze, and the muscles in his jaw ticked once before he replied, "Work. That's vague." "It's better that way." She stood and crossed the room before she could talk herself out of it. She crouched beside the case, her fingertips brushing the cold, ridged edge. There was no lock, just a latch. She glanced back at him. He hadn't moved. "You're not stopping me. You're going to open it, whether I do or not." Chloe flipped the latch. Inside, neat stacks of paper. A small black device that looked like a scanner. 2 manila folders, one of which was labeled with her name in clean block letters. A collection of photographs. The edges curled with handling. She lifted one. It was her. Not posed, not filtered. Just Chloe walking Sir Barksalot in a hoodie and sunglasses, head down, hand in her pocket. Another photo of her waiting in line for coffee. Another of her jogging through Runyon, her hair tied up, no makeup, unaware, unprotected. Her chest tightened. "You were watching me before I hired you?" He nodded, slowly. "Your brother contacted me, said you were in trouble and wouldn't accept help. He wanted someone to get close, someone who could protect you without you knowing." She closed the case gently, as if that might make the truth quieter. The rain had thickened against the window now, and the room felt smaller, the air denser. "You lied to me." "I did." Her voice trembled, but she kept it steady. "You let me believe this was something ordinary, that you were just some guy with a quiet past and a decent leash grip. I never said I was ordinary." "No, you just let me fill in the blanks." Jax stood now, not looming, just present. "I couldn't do the job if you knew. Your brother made it clear. You would shut out anything that looked like protection." "He's not wrong," she muttered. "I was trying to keep you safe." She looked at him sharply. "And now? Is that still your job?" He didn't answer right away. He took a breath like it hurt to speak. "It stopped being just a job the moment I saw the way you carry yourself when you think no one's looking." She blinked, throat tight, the words landing somewhere between her ribs. "You act like you're made of glass," he continued. "But I've seen how much heat glass can take before it breaks. You're not fragile, Chloe. You're burned. And you keep walking through the fire like it owes you something." She turned away, her arms crossed against the sudden chill in her chest. Her eyes stung. "I didn't ask for a hero," she said. "I'm not one." "Then what are you?" He stepped closer, and she could feel his breath, steady and warm. "I'm the man who's been falling for you since the first day your dog turned around and looked at me like he already knew." She closed her eyes. "Get out," she whispered. He didn't move. "I said, get out." And finally, Jack stepped past her, his footsteps slow, quiet, final. The door opened, let in a rush of wet wind, then closed with a gentle click. Chloe stood alone in the warmth he had left behind, and for the first time since this strange dance had begun, she felt truly cold. The rain hadn't stopped. It had only thinned, a constant silver thread unraveling from the sky. It fell like breath on glass, light enough to ignore if you weren't paying attention, steady enough to drown you if you stood in it long enough. Chloe did not notice how long she stood by the guest house door after Jax had left. The weight of the quiet was heavier than his absence. It filled the spaces he used to occupy, drifted into the corners where his footsteps had softened the silence, and sat on her skin like dew. When she finally turned and walked back to the main house, she carried a tightness in her chest that did not ease. The night pressed its cool face to the windows, watching. Inside, every room felt altered. The living room no longer held the echo of his low voice. The hallway lights cast longer shadows. The bedroom air felt thinner, as if even oxygen had taken a step back, unsure of how to remain. She thought she might sleep, but her body rebelled. Her limbs ached with stillness, her thoughts unraveling in loops. When she could no longer sit still, she returned to the guest house. She shouldn't have. She knew that. But the case was still there, heavy and quiet like a confession waiting to be heard again. She opened it. The folder with her name inside was thicker than she remembered. She hadn't gone past the photographs the first time, too stunned, too betrayed. Now, with her hands trembling, she pulled out the rest. Typed reports. Notes in a narrow, precise hand. Descriptions of her routine, cross-referenced with time-stamped security footage. Diagrams of her property, each door and gate marked. Surveillance shots not just of her, but of others too. Her assistant Riley, a delivery man, a neighbor whose name she had never learned. Jax had studied everything. Not just her movements, but her life, her patterns, her shadows. She wanted to feel violated. She wanted anger to bloom again, sharp and clear and righteous, but all she felt was the dull ache of something fragile being laid bare. The pages didn't feel like invasions. They felt like an understanding of her that no one else had ever tried to reach. The clinical tone was softened by his presence in every line. It wasn't about power, it was about care. Utterly quiet, utterly complete. The last paper in the folder was folded in half, not typed, but written by hand. She recognized the pen strokes now. A draft of a letter, perhaps never meant to be sent. I didn't expect to like her. Not in this way. She's louder than I'm used to, even in silence. Brighter. She walks into rooms like she's already decided she's in the wrong place, and then somehow makes the place belong to her anyway. She's not what I thought she'd be. She's not soft, not gentle, but she's kind. God, she's kind. And I can't stand the idea that something might happen to her because I hesitated. Not again. Not this time. Chloe let the paper fall into her lap. The weight in her chest shifted, heavier now, but not painful, just full. Her thumb moved slowly over the ink, as though touch might conjure the heat of his voice. The room smelled like him still. That subtle warmth of cedar and soap, like the memory of clean sheets and early mornings. She closed the case and stood, the letter still clutched in her hand. It was past midnight. The rain had thinned further, now just a whisper on the roof. The guest house felt empty, but not abandoned. When she walked back to the main house, she felt something change behind her ribs. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close, the seed of a question she couldn't stop asking. Why would someone who had nothing left to lose care this much? She slept on the couch that night, Sir Barksalot curled tight against her hip, his warm body grounding her when her thoughts tried to float too high. The fire burned low in the hearth, throwing golden shapes on the ceiling, and Chloe let her fingers curl loosely around the letter, still folded, still unread by anyone else. She didn't need to open it again. The words had already settled into her. Morning came pale and cool. A soft wind blew in through the cracked window and carried with it the smell of sagebrush and eucalyptus from the canyon below. The house felt less haunted somehow, or maybe she was just less afraid of the ghosts. She didn't know where Jax had gone. She hadn't asked. But she had a way of finding things when she needed them. After breakfast, she showered and pulled her hair back in a braid. Not for a video, not for her followers, but for herself. Her face was bare. Her heart was not. She dressed simply, a worn cotton dress and boots that still carried the dust of canyon trails, and she tucked the letter into her pocket. It took 2 phone calls and 1 awkward favor from Riley, but by mid-afternoon she had an address. It was 4 hours away, a small coastal town that barely registered on the map. No fan events, no photo ops, no glittering skyline. When she arrived, the sun was already tilting westward, softening the ocean into rippling glass. She found the building tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. The sign out front was hand-carved, the kind of thing made with love, not money. Veterans Resource Collective. A man with kind eyes at the front desk pointed her down a hallway without asking questions. He was in a back room, shoulders hunched over a box of donated coats, folding them with careful hands. His shirt was plain, his hair damp, as if he had just come in from the sea. He did not look up at first. When he did, it was as if the air shifted. Chloe. Her name left his mouth in a whisper. Not surprise, not relief, just the barest thread of something raw and alive. She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "You left," she said, voice quiet. "I thought I had to." "You didn't." He looked at her like he wanted to believe it, but didn't know how. She reached into her pocket and unfolded the letter. She didn't hand it to him. She just held it in her palm, pressed to her chest. "You wrote this." He nodded. "Why?" "Because I didn't know how to say it out loud." She took a step closer, then another. The ocean whispered through the cracked window behind him. Salt and wind and sunlight wove themselves into the quiet between them. "Say it now," she said. He hesitated. Then, slowly, his voice roughened by wind and truth, he said, "I care about you. More than I meant to. More than I should. And not because I was hired. Because I stayed." She closed the distance and looked up into his face. "Then stay now," she said. "Not for the job, not for the house. For me." Jax didn't speak. He just reached out, slow and reverent, and touched her face like it was the first safe thing he'd held in years. She leaned into him, not because she was weak, but because she was tired of holding herself alone. And for the first time, she felt what it meant to be protected not by force, but by love. The house smelled different without him. Chloe stood in the entryway, keys still dangling from her fingers, the late afternoon light stretching long and gold across the tile. The stillness wasn't peaceful anymore. It pressed at her skin like damp fabric. The echo of her own footsteps sounded too loud. The walls, once touched by the faint aroma of coffee and the quiet hum of another breath nearby, felt cavernous now. Sir Barkslot came padding down the hall, his tail wagging out of loyalty more than enthusiasm. He sniffed her boots, then glanced toward the guest house with a low whimper, as if to ask why the other heartbeat wasn't there. She dropped her keys in the bowl by the door and sat on the bottom step of the staircase, resting her elbows on her knees. Her head bowed. She had only been gone 1 day. Less than that, really. Just a few hours and a long drive up the coast to find the person who had once kept watch outside her bedroom window without her knowing. But returning felt like stepping into the quiet after an argument that had taken everything from the room except the memory of sound. The letter was still in her bag. She had not put it away. She had not reread it. It didn't need rereading. She stared out the window, watching the slow crawl of the shadows stretch across the driveway. The sun had begun its descent, brushing the rooftops in soft tangerine, catching the corners of her life, and making everything look warmer than it felt. The kind of light that made people believe everything could be forgiven, even if only for the length of a sunset. Her phone buzzed against the wood floor where she had dropped it beside her. One message. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, hope blooming sharp and uninvited. It wasn't him. It was Riley. There was a single line. No punctuation, no emojis, just breathless fear packed into plain text. He got in. "I think he hurt someone. I'm calling the police." Her heart stuttered. The world slowed into brutal clarity. She rose without a sound, already dialing before she reached the door. The call went unanswered. She called again. Voicemail. Sir Barkslot barked once, sharp and uncertain. The streets were a blur of headlights and sudden turns, her car carving through the city with the single-mindedness of panic. She barely noticed the lights or the cars that honked as she sped through a yellow that was closer to red. The buildings grew taller as she approached the studio space Riley sometimes used, a converted warehouse not far from downtown. Riley worked late there when she was behind on contracts or avoiding her roommate's new boyfriend. Chloe knew the pattern. She had teased her about it just last week. When she pulled up, the door was ajar. The security lights were on, but they cast long pools of shadow across the cement lot, the kind that suggested movement even when nothing moved. She stepped out, her phone clutched tightly, knuckles pale with pressure. She should have waited for the police. She should have called Jax. But neither of those thoughts stayed longer than a flicker. She stepped through the door. The air inside was still, thick with the scent of paint and old metal and something darker, sharper. Blood, she realized. Somewhere close. Her knees nearly buckled. "Riley!" she called, her voice low and hoarse, too afraid to echo. A soft sound answered her. Not a voice, not a word. A shift of weight. A breath drawn too sharply. She followed it, step by step, toward the back where the storage rooms were sectioned off by thick curtains and leaning towers of canvas. She found Riley slumped against the back wall, her eyes wide and wet with pain, her shoulders smeared with crimson. "Hey," Chloe whispered, falling to her knees, hands already searching for the wound. "He's still here," Riley breathed, wincing. "He asked about you. He was waiting." "Don't speak," Chloe said, pressing the hem of her shirt against the gash to stop the bleeding. "Help's coming." "I tried to fight him," Riley whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I didn't want him to touch anything that belonged to you." Chloe's heart cracked. She pressed harder against the wound, whispering reassurances she didn't believe. And then she heard it. Footsteps. Deliberate. No rush, no panic. Just the slow, confident tread of someone who thought he still had time. Her body turned cold. She reached for her phone again, trying to stay between Riley and the sound, her fingers slipping on the glass. Her breath caught in her throat. Then the footsteps stopped. A different sound filled the silence. A scuffle. Something heavy striking the wall. A sharp grunt, muffled and pained. Then stillness again. The curtain tore open. Jack stood in the gap, chest rising hard, one hand bloodied, the other clenched tight around the intruder's jacket. The man sagged in his grip, unconscious or close to it. He looked at Chloe. Not the same man she had last seen on a windswept beach. This man had re-entered a world he had tried to walk away from, and his eyes were alight with fury that had no place to land but here. "You okay?" he asked, voice rough. She nodded. "She's hurt." He moved instantly, lowering the man to the floor with one hand while pulling off his shirt with the other, pressing it to Riley's wound. His movements were steady. No tremble, no hesitation. Just action. The police arrived moments later. Everything moved fast. Chloe gave a statement she barely remembered. The EMTs took Riley, who gripped her hand until the very last moment. Officers wrapped the intruder in cuffs and carried him off without ceremony. A familiar detective asked if she needed a ride. She shook her head. When the space emptied, and only the dust and echoes remained, Jax turned to her. "Why didn't you call me?" She didn't answer at first. Her throat was too tight. "I didn't know if you'd come," she said finally. His face softened, just enough. "I will always come," he said. Chloe stepped forward, tears tracking clean lines down her cheeks. She placed a hand on his chest, right over the beat she could feel beneath his skin. "I wasn't afraid of him," she whispered. "Not really. I was afraid of being alone again, of not knowing where you were." He placed his hand over hers, holding it there. "You're not alone," he said. "Not anymore." Outside, the sirens had faded. The city moved on. But inside that warehouse, lit only by the flicker of an overhead bulb, Chloe stood pressed against the only truth that had ever made her feel safe. And for the first time, her fear gave way to something else. Hope. The wind along the coast always carried something ancient. It slipped through Chloe's fingers as she stood on the edge of the cliff trail, the air salted and clean, brushing her cheeks and tangling her hair like an old friend returning without apology. The path beneath her boots was still damp from last night's storm, the earth soft and giving, each step whispering into the silence that followed her since dawn. Waves curled below, slow and heavy, dragging froth across the shore with a sound that could have been breath or sorrow, depending on the hour. She had come looking for him again, not because she doubted he would return to her, but because something in her needed to return to where she had first seen him vulnerable, folding donated coats with quiet reverence. The small town rose behind her in a blur of soft rooftops and blue shutters. Familiar now, though she had only walked its narrow streets twice before. The same bakery scent spilled from open doors. The same wildflowers gathered in bursts along the sidewalks, defiantly bright against the gray stone. Jax had told her he would come back with her. He had promised that much. But it wasn't about bringing him home. It was about knowing what that word meant when it had been taken from him for so long. She heard his footsteps before she turned, not rushed, not uncertain, just the steady rhythm she had come to know, like her own breath. She felt it more than heard it, the way the space behind her shifted, the way the air changed shape to make room for someone it had missed. "I wondered if I'd find you here," he said. His voice reached her before his shadow did, low and warm and edged with something she couldn't name but knew intimately. She didn't turn immediately. Instead, she let his presence wash over her the way the tide did below, slow and insistent. "I couldn't sit still," she said. The house felt too quiet. He came to stand beside her. They didn't touch, but she could feel the heat of his arm inches from her own. "I know the feeling." She looked at him then. His hair was wind-tossed, darker where the sea air had kissed it damp. He hadn't shaved. The stubble along his jaw was just long enough to soften him, just short enough to suggest he hadn't been sleeping. His eyes searched hers, but gently, as if he understood she had come here not for answers, but for proof that she had not imagined everything they had started to build. "I never wanted to run," he said. "Not from you, I know. I thought if I left, maybe it would keep you safe. Do you still believe that?" He shook his head, slow and certain. "No, I believe the only way to keep you safe is by staying close enough to catch you if you fall." Chloe felt something shift in her chest. Not a breaking, not even a healing. Just space being made where fear used to live. She reached out and slid her hand into his. His fingers closed around hers immediately, warm and sure. She hadn't realized how much she needed the certainty of that touch until it was there. "You scared me," she said, voice barely above the wind. "When you left, when I couldn't find you. I was scared too," he admitted, "but not of what might happen, of what I might become if I let myself stay. And now?" He brought their joined hands up to his chest, holding them there like a prayer. "Now, I don't want to be anywhere else." The wind gusted, sharp and clean, and she stepped into him, pressing her forehead against his shoulder. His arms came around her without hesitation, pulling her close, wrapping her in the quiet strength that had become more familiar than her own reflection. She breathed him in, salt and earth and that faint warmth she could never quite place, the scent that had become the smell of calm. He didn't speak. He just held her, both of them rooted there, two figures stitched into the fabric of a day that had asked for nothing and given everything. "I had dreams," she murmured against his chest, "of someone standing at the edge of my bed, watching, not hurting, just waiting." "I know," he said. "I think it was always him, that man, the one who followed me. I think I knew, even before I admitted it." "You did." She leaned back enough to look at him. "And I think I knew you would protect me, before I ever asked." His hands slid to her waist, his thumbs brushing the fabric of her sweater like he was memorizing the shape of her again. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered. "I don't know how to be in this kind of whatever this is." "Neither do I. But I want to." His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but something softer. "Then we'll learn." The sky behind them began to change, the blue deepening toward indigo, the first stars pressing through like shy confessions. The ocean below exhaled and drew breath again. The world didn't rush. Neither did they. She took his hand again, and together they walked the trail back toward the town, their shoulders brushing with every step. No one hurried. No one spoke. And when they reached the street, where the bakery's window glowed like a hearth, they paused. "Come home with me," she said. Jax turned toward her. The light caught his face and revealed everything he had once tried to hide. Not just pain, not just guilt, but tenderness so fierce it nearly unraveled her. "I was already on my way," he said. She kissed him then. Not with hesitation, not with heat, just with a kind of sacred quiet. A kiss that tasted like the first warm sip after a long storm, like a name remembered, like the breath you didn't know you were holding. When they broke apart, he reached up and touched her face, the calloused pad of his thumb brushing the corner of her mouth. "I don't want to be your bodyguard anymore," he said. She smiled, her eyes full of something bright and unguarded. "Good," she said, "because I don't need one." "I want to be something else," he added, quieter now. Her hand found his heart. "You already are." The house felt alive when they returned. It had been quiet before, heavy with memories and hesitation, but now every creak of the floorboard, every whisper of wind against the windows seemed to greet them like a room inhaling again after holding its breath for too long. Chloe stepped inside first, pausing in the entryway as if reintroducing herself to a space that no longer held the weight of solitude. The faint scent of cedar still lingered in the air, softening the sharper edges of the past weeks. Behind her, Jax closed the door with a gentleness that made the silence deeper, not heavier. Sir Barkslot came running with a joyous yip, tail wagging in a blur. He skidded across the tile and launched himself toward Chloe, bouncing against her legs in chaotic greeting. His fur was slightly wild, ears perked and eyes gleaming as he sniffed her jeans, and then turned to Jax with a short, approving bark. Chloe laughed, the sound light and clear. It was the first time in days that her laughter had come without effort. Jax knelt and let the dog climb over him, letting the weight of him push into his chest like a reminder that not everything needed to be understood to be cherished. He scratched behind Sir Barkslot's ears, muttering something low that Chloe couldn't hear but that made the dog's tail wag even harder. They made dinner together that evening. Something simple, familiar. Pasta with garlic and butter, a salad that neither of them really ate, a bottle of red wine with a cork that crumbled halfway through opening it, the kitchen filled with steam and the smell of warm bread. Chloe chopped basil while Jax stood beside her, slicing tomatoes with surgical precision. Occasionally their shoulders brushed, and each time it felt deliberate, a reminder that they were no longer dancing around what was real. The radio played something soft in the background, the kind of music that asked for nothing but left the silence richer. When Chloe dropped a sprig of rosemary, Jax leaned down to retrieve it, and for a moment their faces were close enough that she could feel his breath against her cheek. She didn't move, neither did he. The air between them stilled, dense with everything they hadn't said out loud but had already promised in quieter ways. After dinner they didn't talk much. The weight of the meal, the wine, the comfort of each other's presence settled into their limbs. Chloe curled onto the couch with her legs tucked under her, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, while Jax stood at the window watching the sky shift from twilight to deep starlit blue. The lights of Los Angeles shimmered below like a sea of diamonds poured across black velvet, dazzling and unreachable. He turned to her, his face half in shadow, half in golden lamplight. There was something in his expression that pulled her upright, something quiet but sharp, like the hush before thunder. "What is it?" she asked. He took a step closer, eyes fixed not on her but on the space just behind her shoulder, as if he had heard something no one else could. Then he moved faster than she'd seen him move in days. In one motion, he crossed the room and yanked her down off the couch, shielding her body with his as a shattering noise exploded from the back of the house. Glass. A window. Chloe's ears rang with the sound, her heart already hammering before her mind caught up. Jax was up in an instant. His hand slipped to the small of his back, retrieving something sleek and black that disappeared into his grip. A firearm, compact and silent. He motioned for her to stay low, eyes never leaving the hallway. He stepped out of the room, disappearing into the dark like a shadow with muscle. Sir Barkslot had gone still, crouched beside Chloe, ears flat, eyes trained toward the same hallway Jax had entered. The only sound was the steady pounding of her own pulse and the distant creak of movement through the house. A door somewhere shifted on its hinges. She waited, crouched behind the couch, her breath catching in short bursts that tasted of adrenaline and fear. Then came the scuffle, a thud, a cry that was cut short. Silence again. Chloe rose on shaking legs, barefoot and bracing herself against the couch as she crept toward the hallway. She moved slowly, each footstep deliberate against the cool tile. Sir Barks-a-Lot padded beside her like a guardian. She found them in the guest bathroom. Jax had the man pinned to the floor, one knee on his back, the gun now tucked safely against his chest. The man was gasping, face turned into the tile, blood blooming slowly from his mouth where his head had struck the sink. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. Chloe pressed a hand to her chest. She recognized him. The same figure from the grainy footage. The one who had stood too long outside her gate. The one Riley had tried to fight. His eyes met hers now, dazed and wild, and she took a step back without thinking. Jax's voice cut through the space. Calm. Cold. Police are on their way. Don't move. The man tried to speak, but Jax pressed him more firmly into the ground. It wasn't long before the sirens arrived, cutting through the quiet with a familiar scream. Blue and red spilled through the windows like war paint. Officers swarmed the space, and once again, Jax stepped aside without ceremony, letting them take the man away. He gave his statement with crisp clarity. Chloe barely remembered what she said. Her voice felt distant, like it belonged to someone watching from far above. Hours passed in minutes. When the last squad car pulled away, she stood on the porch in the cool night air, her arms folded tightly across her chest, feeling the tremble that had lived in her bones since the crash of glass. Jax came out beside her, his presence warm and solid. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. "I thought it was over," she said softly. "It is now," he replied. She turned to him, stepping closer. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You saved me again." His eyes met hers, and for once, they weren't guarded. They were full. "No," he said. "You let me." She reached up and cupped his face in both hands. His skin was warm under her palms, stubbled and real. And then, finally, she kissed him. Not like the soft hush of their first kiss by the sea. This kiss was fuller, fiercer, soaked in everything they had survived. It was a promise pressed between lips, a seal to everything that had been unspoken until now. When they broke apart, neither stepped away. Sir Barks-a-Lot barked once, sharp and pleased, circling their legs as if approving the union he had suspected all along. Chloe leaned her forehead against Jax's, her hands still resting on his cheeks, her voice steady now. "Don't ever leave again." "I won't," he said. "Not unless you ask me to." She smiled through the tears that finally came, not of fear, but of release. "You're home now," she whispered. And, for the first time, he believed it. The morning unfolded with the hush of something sacred. A soft marine layer drifted across the city like a veil, muting the edges of buildings and trees in a quiet watercolor of gray and blue. The hills stretched pale beneath the early light, wrapped in mist, and the sun made no promises yet. Inside the house, everything breathed with stillness. Not the stillness of fear, but the calm that follows survival, the kind that knows every sound has meaning, and every silence is earned. Chloe stood barefoot in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The steam curled into the air and mingled with the scent of lemon and mint, and her sweater hung low on her shoulder, loose and soft from so many mornings like this. Sir Barks-a-Lot sat nearby, his chin resting on his front paws, his ears flicking lazily at the buzz of a fly in the window. Jax had not yet come in from the garden, where he'd gone to stretch, to walk the perimeter out of habit, to let the cool, damp grass remind him he was still here. She could hear his footsteps crunching faintly beyond the patio door. Each one was familiar now. There was no startle left in her when he passed behind her line of sight. No unease when the boards creaked outside the bedroom. His presence had rooted itself in the rhythm of her home, and in that rhythm she had found something entirely new: rest. He entered the room without speaking. His shirt clung to him in patches where the dew had soaked through, and his hair curled at the edges, damp and unruly. She offered him her cup without a word. He took a sip and returned it, his fingers brushing hers. His thumb lingered, just for a second, before falling away. They moved together now without needing to fill space with talk. Chloe turned toward the pantry and pulled out oats, honey, blueberries. He filled the kettle again, a dance in small gestures. She glanced up once and caught his eyes on her, that quiet, devoted way he watched things he cared about. It never made her feel owned, only seen. Later, after breakfast and a long walk through the canyon with the dog bounding joyfully ahead, she sat with Jax on the back porch while the sun slowly climbed over the city. They didn't rush to make plans. She no longer lived by content schedules or follower milestones. Those things had dulled like gold, left too long in shadow. Her voice online was still hers, but now it was less perfect, more honest. People noticed. They stayed. But even if they hadn't, she knew now she wouldn't have traded the truth for applause. Jax brushed a hand through her hair, his touch more like memory than action. He leaned back, one arm hooked around her shoulders, his fingers tracing gentle lines across her arm. They watched the world in silence for a while, not needing anything from it, just bearing witness. Then, with a voice wrapped in sunlight, he said, "I have something for you." She tilted her head to look at him. "Should I be concerned?" He smiled, but his eyes held something serious beneath the warmth. He stood and reached into the side pocket of his jacket, the one he'd left draped over the porch rail. From it, he pulled a small velvet pouch. Her heart stilled. He didn't kneel. That wasn't his style. He simply stepped close, into her space, and opened her palm with both of his. Inside the pouch was a silver ring, not flashy, not glittering. The band was smooth, almost matte, but when the sunlight caught it just right, she saw the fine engraving carved deep into the inner curve. Her name and his, not full names, just the names they had whispered to each other in the dark when nothing else was real but breath. She looked up at him, her lips parted. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Not yet. "It isn't a proposal," he said. "Not yet. It's a promise that I'm not going anywhere, that wherever you go, I go." She closed her fingers around the ring and stepped into him. Her arms slid beneath his jacket, and he folded himself around her like he had been waiting for the invitation. His chin rested on the top of her head, and for a long time they stayed there, swaying slightly in the soft morning breeze. When they pulled apart, she slid the ring onto her middle finger and twisted it once. It was cool against her skin, but it warmed quickly. "You'll have to talk to Sir Barksalot if you want to make this official," she said, grinning through the flush in her cheeks. Jax raised an eyebrow. "Does he require a dowry?" "He requires loyalty." "And meat." Jax nodded solemnly. "I can give both." They laughed, and the sound was rich and easy, echoing into the hills. The rest of the day unfolded like pages in a slow book. They visited the local shelter together and came home with a second dog, a mutt with scruffy fur and one ear that refused to stand up straight. Chloe named her Lady Woofington, much to Jax's dismay, but even he smiled when the puppy claimed his lap that evening and refused to leave. That night, they laid blankets out in the yard. The sky stretched black above them, stars spread thick across the heavens. Sir Barksalot snored at their feet. Lady Woofington chewed absently on the edge of Jax's boot. Chloe curled into his side, her head on his shoulder, her fingers laced with his across her stomach. "I used to think love would feel like fire," she whispered. He shifted slightly, brushing his lips against her temple. "And now? Now it feels like water, like something I can rest inside without drowning." He didn't speak, but his arms tightened around her. She looked up at the stars and saw no stories written there, no answers spelled out in constellations, just light, endless and bright and always reaching. She smiled. She once thought the dog walker was her bodyguard. Now she knew better. He had been her compass, her mirror, her quiet storm, and somehow, in all the ways that mattered, he had become her home.